sent pictures like that home. I had a little Brownie camera, and sometimes I would get to use it, so I took quite a number of pictures in Korea. And I would send home pictures like this so my mother would survive. And she was on computer, or TVs hadn't been really developed yet, so it was all on the radio. So she knew where I was the whole time. I'm learning things here as you speak about Korea, because we never knew anything at all. I graduated from high school in 1948 up in Idaho. I had been raised in Southern California. I was born on my mother had to get off of a train heading for Utah at the Depression, when my father lost a job in LA, Los Angeles. Excuse me. And anyway, they stayed there for about a year and a half, and then back to California. So I was raised in California schools until I was 15. Parents decided they wanted to go back home, so we moved to up near Logan, and then my father bought a garage up in Clifton, just out of Preston, Idaho. My father was from Richmond, Utah. My mother was 7 miles away in Idaho, in Franklin, Utah. So that's how they got together. Anyway, I graduated in 1948, and immediately we moved back to California. We stayed up there 2 years. So I got a couple of jobs, and I ran into a young man that I was working with, and he talked me into joining the Marine Corps Reserve. Their location at the time was in what they call Chavez Ravine in Los Angeles, right next to the big zoo that's there in the mountains, in the hills. And that is now the Dodger Stadium, just for your little background. They tore it down afterwards. So anyway, I went to Camp Pendleton 2 different times on the rifle range. And I've served in the band, because when I got in the reserve, they wanted to know what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I don't know. I played trombone since junior high school, so I ended up in the band. So we played at boxing matches and civic events, Rose Parade, that kind of thing. After I was in there about a year and a half, got a letter in the mail, you're activated. There's a Korean War. I had no idea what Korea was. So let's see, at that time I was 18. We were activated in 1950 in July, and the war started, what did we say, in June?
June 25th.
June. And we never knew anything that was going on, where we were going, how things were going. But anyway, we went from Los Angeles to Whittier, picked up an outfit. I don't know what their specialty was. Excuse my voice, by the way. 85 has just killed my voice. And then we convoyed down to Camp Pendleton. We were there long enough to stand in long lines and get hundreds of shots in both arms. We went down to San Diego, boarded a troop ship, and went to Kobe, Japan. And there we were loaded onto LSTs. It took them, I don't know, about a week to load everything up. LSTs, anybody know? That's a landing craft. It's quite a large ship. The front of the nose opens up and a ramp goes down. They park out in the harbors, and then anybody ever heard of a deck?
Is this an LST?
Pardon me?
Is that an LST?
You know, I don't know. I don't know. This probably is.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about it was that when our outfit was activated, they, down at Camp Pendleton, they decided I would be in the auto repair because I had a little bit of auto repair experience. So I ended up in the auto repair of a 105 artillery unit. I think there were approximately, the way I understand, I've learned everything that I didn't know, and I didn't know anything out of this book. It's been quite interesting. in Mortal Kombat in Korea. And anyway, we loaded up on the LSTs. They loaded the whole thing with in the below deck with artillery, and then they parked ducks on top of that for landing. And
if any of you ever been to Seattle or San Francisco, you've seen those cars that drive around. They look like boats. Those are the ducks. They're actually originally from World War II in Korea. They still use them to haul tourists around some of these bayside areas.
I'm sorry I didn't explain that. Thank you, David. They're pretty good size, like a small truck, and they have huge tires on them. And they launch out of the LSTs, go to the shore, blow up their tires, and go up and land. And they were great for the wounded because they were so comfortable with those huge tires. Let's see, this is where we landed in Incheon. They have a 32 foot tide. So the next thing we knew, our ships were sitting in the mud. We got our rifles issued to us as we were going around the bottom of Korea from Kobe, Japan. And we were issued M1 rifles from the Second World War. We landed in Incheon. We stayed out while the infantry went in, and we watched the bombardment with the aircraft. They literally blew Incheon apart from the air before the Marines went in. We landed the next day, and I guess our first casualty was our bulldozer, because it got stuck in the mud and then the tide came in. Don't ever know what happened to it.
Might still be there.
Still be there. There was no airport. There's a huge international airport out in the harbor now. And of course the civilians, all while I was there, the civilians were around us, either coming or going. I felt so sorry for them. Back in those days, the elderly Papa Sans, you've seen pictures of them maybe, they would have the pack rack on their back and maybe several feet in the air carrying all our stuff. Everything was very native. Everything in Seoul, when we got into Seoul, probably took maybe a day, maybe 2 days. First casualty that I knew about in our outfit was a second lieutenant and one of our trumpeters in our band. We got put into several different units, and I only saw 2 or 3 of them the whole time I was there. And I was there for 13, 14 months, 15 months. And during that time, we lost, we lost the lieutenant from a mortar shell hitting next to him. And he was a forward observer. One of our trumpeters was his driver. And he was far enough away from the Jeep that he didn't get killed. And there were 3 trombonists, I was one of them. One of the trombonists was killed. He was driving an ammunition truck and was killed in an ambush. So that's the only 2 that I know. Let's see, we ended up going into Seoul. By then, Seoul had been warred over 2 different times in 2 months. So the place was totally devastated. All I remember was power lines down and buildings all collapsed. There was no high rise there, just 2 or 3 story buildings. And we ended up on a palace ground, which I had no idea what it was. And we only stayed there, we didn't stay overnight. I'm sorry, my voice is going. We stayed overnight, and one thing I observed there was a supply depot that the North Koreans had set up. And all of the labels on them said, for the recovery of Europe from the United States. So how that got there, we'll never know. Am I doing too long here?
No, you're fine. I'm gonna go get you some water.
Okay, thank you. And anyway, while we're on the palace grounds, I do not remember much, and I know that talking with Aaron of what the study he did, and I said, gosh, that's 65 years ago. You know, I really don't even remember my name, let alone what I, you know, all the detail. All I remember is going on the palace grounds, and me and one other guy went out into the zoo. There was a zoo there. And there was I don't know if it was a museum or if it was a president's palace or what, but it was quite fancy. And we were walking through the zoo, and I was thinking of all those poor animals. You know, they're probably all dying or starving or dead. And as we were walking along, here come around the corner a monkey, probably this tall. And the monkey just started running towards us, and he was screaming and yelling, you know, doing monkey talk. And he just kept coming, he didn't slow down. So pretty soon I figured he was, you know, crazed, starving to death, ready to eat us. So I just swung my rifle and shot, and I hit his tail. His tail came off, and the tail was on the ground. One of those little things you remember. That's all I remember about the palace grounds. The monkey literally turned around in the air, went back and out of sight. And a minute or so later, here comes a zookeeper with the monkey all wrapped around it, and quiet. That's like, so that's all I remember in the palace grounds. The next thing, we were signed up to go up on the 38th parallel. And let's see, that would have been September into 1st of October. So we were there on the 38th parallel, and we were sent over towards Japan, towards the East Coast. And at that time, there was all of the United Nations across. Now, I'm trying to remember the mileage across with Korea. If you were up at Pyongyang, the capital, thank you. At the capital, from Pyongyang to the west coast was 120 miles. So it's probably 130 or 40 there. And as you got to the top of Korea, it fanned out, so it was 400 miles. And we were there back and forth. The North Koreans that were down south, clear down to the, we're not showing there, clear down to the Pusan perimeter, they kept coming up as guerrilla outfits, but they were cut off at the 38th parallel. And all I remember there is we would go forward and backwards. Sometimes we'd be 2, sometimes 3 times a day. And the only combat that I had was tank shells coming in, or their artillery. And that was a constant thing. And every once in a while, they would hit something. Let's see, we were there for into October, towards the middle or end of October. They told us then we were going back to Busan, back to Incheon, load on LSTs, and we didn't know where we were going. Didn't know how the war was going. Didn't know if we were winning or losing. But along the 38th parallel, we were constantly moving back and forth because one of the outfits might be a Korean outfit, it might be a Irish outfit. There were, you know, like the United Nations, I forget how many different units. But we never dealt with them, never saw them, never dealt with the Koreans, never saw them. We were just the Marine Corps. We were always just by ourselves, and the civilians coming back and forth. Everything we saw was in the homes. There were really no homes. They were thatched huts, and they warmed them under the floor. So all the villages we'd go through, of course, were all shot up. These things were pretty much destroyed. We loaded on LSTs, went around Busan, the bottom, back up the East Coast between Japan and Korea. And we were on LSTs for 2 weeks while they were unloading, or excuse me, removing all the mines in the Wonsan Harbor, which was above the 38th parallel. Can you flip that one back?
Right
Oh, you
here.
did already.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one, son.
So the 38th was, where's the 38th? Right in here.
Yeah.
There's Pyongyang, the capital. So anyway, we came around, back up to the Wonsan Harbor. Took them a couple of weeks to clear out the mines. So we were in trucks, sleeping in the trucks on the decks of the LST. And we finally went in. Then we found out as soon as we landed, and front of the ship went down and we started unloading, we were given orders to load back up again, because Bob Hope had been there the day before. We then went up to Hungnam Harbor. Let's see, is that go any higher? Anyway, we unloaded there, and we went up into the North Korean mountains, through here, in the Chosun Reservoir. All of you heard of the Chosun Reservoir. That was probably the famous, most famous battle in Korea. And there were 20,000 Marines, there were a little bit of Army, and there were British Royal Marines. Thing about the British Royal Marines, they never wore helmets, they wore berets. And we interacted with them a couple of times. There we go, that's the North Korean. I wanted to read a couple of things out of this book that kind of sets the scene of what happened up there as far as now this kind of ends up at the end of the war. Since the end of this bloody conflict, billions of words have been written describing it as a war that should be forgotten. The lives of 4 million people have been sacrificed, and most of those were Chinese and civilians. And the border between North and South Korea remained about the same as it had been 3 years earlier. So nothing really was accomplished, according to this author. It was said that little or nothing had been accomplished, and that 54,246 American servicemen had been killed and died in vain. There is no doubt that many mistakes were made, not only by the Truman administration, but also by the American military leaders. The failures were primarily the creation of MacArthur and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is kind of interesting. Of course, we knew none of this, but there were a lot of mistakes made, a lot of lives lost. And anybody ever been in the Army here? So you've been in the Army? Oh, I'll have to hear about that.
Reserves.
Army Reserve. I always said when I got out of Korea, I would never join the Army. I would be back with the Marine. The Army went up the center part of to the capital, and then they went on up towards the Yellow River and spread out. Sometimes there would be 20 miles in between their units. So when the Chinese came in, let's see, December of 50, the Chinese came in. They took out all those Army units one by one because they were scattered, couldn't help each other. And the Marines don't operate that way. They're always in contact, always in control. The Marine Commandant did not follow the orders of MacArthur when we were up in the North Korean mountains. He kept us close enough together. Even though all of the advanced Marine units, the infantry, were up in the Chosun Reservoir. When the Chinese came in, like I said, there were 20,000 Marines. When the Chinese came in, we were told at least 200,000 came in into the mountains. They did very, very well in their strategic areas because they surrounded everybody. They did the same with the Army over in the Central Valley. Surrounded them, and then started taking out the units. And as they came through, they were always in ambushes. So we saw lots of convoys of Army near us in different parts of the war, where there'd be a whole column of destroyed vehicles where they'd be ambushed and taken out. We stayed in the North Korean mountains till, I think it was the 2nd of December of that same 50, landed in September. Here we are on the 1st of December, and the Chinese are in the war then. And first time I saw Chinese was they came in the daytime around noon. We were in a camp in kind of a bowl area called Coterie. And then there was a couple of other places, about 25 miles was the Chosun Reservoir. I guess the first time I knew Chinese were there, I was going to take a ride with one of my friends, and there was going to be a convoy going on up towards Chosun Reservoir. That convoy, I got in his truck with him, and the convoy was hit before our end of the convoy even got out of camp, so that they were stopped. So all of the Marines up in, and the British Royal Marines were up into the Chosin Reservoir. They were all trapped and totally surrounded. And they suffered tremendous casualties trying to get out. It took them 3 days to get from Chosin down to Coterie where we were. Another day we were around noon, fighting broke out, and the Chinese had come across an open field with white uniforms. And the interesting thing was they had our American Second World War Thompson submachine guns. Anyway, they were wiped out. They never got in. The British Royal Marines were still with us, went through the camp and up on the side of the mountain. And the Marine Corsairs came in and napalm. So they kept the Chinese up in the mountains all around our bowl. They finally got down from the Chosin Reservoir. There were dead, truckloads of dead. All the tanks had bodies all over them. And they dug down, the weather was another factor. It was 25, 35 degrees below zero. It was totally, totally cold. And there was so much frostbitten injuries, maybe even more than by military. I had a picture, I don't know where it's at now, of burying a lot of the dead there in Coterie before we left. There was a MASH station there, and we destroyed everything, and then they started airdropping in gasoline, and you had to be really careful where you walk because that stuff was just falling out of the air. And we were trying to salvage gasoline, but I never did find any that wasn't broken. And then they started dropping some bridge parts, which we didn't know why. But we found out later, as we left Coterie to go 35 miles down steep canyon back to the Hungnam Harbor, there was a pipeline for a hydroelectric plant that went down the side of the mountain. And our road would come down like this, and straight down off the side of the road is how the mountain went. It was real steep. They blew that bridge out, and there was no way for us to get out. So anyway, they airdropped. They made an airdrop in. How much time did I get?
Say
A couple minutes.
a few more minutes. I want some time for questions.
Okay. Anyway, they airdropped. I'll close this up quick. They airdropped in. They made a token drop to see how they could do it in Japan, and the parachutes didn't open, and the bridge parts were totally wiped out. They dropped 6 sections in our little area, and 2 of those were damaged, so they had 4, and they had to cover an area about 30 feet so that we could get down through there. They put the bridge in, this amazing engineers, and we never mixed with them. All of a sudden there's a bridge there. And, which was great. They did also with pontoon bridges all the time when we'd come through. They found out that if a tank went across this little narrow 30-foot bridge where the water facility was here and went underneath it, that the treads would work on the roadway on the bridge. So they used some bulldozers, they said, and pushed and got them lined up. So there was 2 inches for a tank to go across, clear, they could make it. Any more than 2 inches, and then they were off the track. And it was a ½ inch for Jeeps. I went across the Jeep and I had no idea I only had a ½ inch. Anyway, we evacuated Coterie and went down, started down this 35-foot load, very steep. We're not allowed to use headlights. It was after dark before we started down. And about 2 in the morning, we noticed the front of the column stopped. And I was probably maybe back, maybe 30 or 40 vehicles. And I don't know how many were behind me. And there were also thousands of Korean civilians following us. And anyway, the Chinese had circled around us and hit the column and stopped the move, right on a bend. And by 5 in the morning, by daylight, we were there all night under attack by the Chinese. And they burnt every vehicle up to one vehicle. There were 2 vehicles in front of my Jeep still that were burning by daylight. So I'll end that there. We did get through and got back to Hungnam, loaded board ship. There was no place to even sit. You had to stand. There were so many people. And then after we were evacuated back to Busan, then the Korean civilians were evacuated, thousands of them. And we went then from Busan back up to the 38th for the next full year. And I was evacuated out, the last of the Incheon in December of '51. Then I dashed home and married my girlfriend. I was married in February. One last thing I'll read here. Was the Korean War worth fighting? It was a war of cruelty, stupidity. I never found out afterwards how many mistakes were made by our side. Error, misjudgment, racism, prejudice, and atrocities on both sides committed by people in high, middle, and low ranks. Only the numerous instances of humanity on all levels, heroism in battle, self-sacrifice, kindness, and sympathy to the enemy, making right about the war bearable. And our side was usually very kind to prisoners, very kind to the Koreans that were evacuating around us. Now I had one time in that morning after that last attack, I have one thing that I always remember. As our column stopped, and like I say, it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I went over, and there was 3 little huts on both sides of the road and a big riverbed onto the right. And I lay down behind Boulder and started shooting at running figures, because that's as close as I got to them. And all of a sudden I got a strong feeling I need to move. So I moved back about 20 feet, got under my Jeep, and was firing with a tire in front of me, down through the column. The next morning, there was a Marine with a bullet hole right through his helmet, right where I had been. So I always felt I was helped to get out of there. And the closest I got from a hit was sand thrown in my face, and I thought I got hit in the face. And it was just a bullet that close, and didn't get me. I think that's very close.
All right. Questions?
Now I'll drink the water.
Oh.
That was the worst battle that the Marines ever faced in that retreat from the Choctaw. And you are one lucky man.
Lucky. Yeah, we heard afterwards that Chairman Mao of the Chinese had said, wipe out the Marine Division. That would be a big feather in our cap. And so we were told to, if we couldn't get that bridge built, we were told to pour gasoline on our vehicles and run them off over the side, and then try to make it over to the East Coast through the mountains. Like I say, it was 25, 30 degrees below zero, very, very cold.
Did you ever
Anything else? I really didn't know what you were studying. Well, go ahead.
First of all, thank you for having served in the Korean War.
Thank you.
But you mentioned how you had very little understanding of the Korean War in the beginning. Did that change at all as you were continuing to serve there, or did you?
I had to read this book.
More.
I had no idea there was mistakes made, and of course MacArthur was relieved. I don't know if you knew that or not. Truman had to fly to Wake Island, I think it was. Anyway, he fired him because the politics behind that was Russia was totally behind China. Russia supplied a lot of their equipment, but according to this book, Russia sat back and folded their hands while the Chinese did all the fighting. and the Chinese then had to pay the Russians for their help. So it's kind of
What did you think of the MacArthur firing at that point?
Can you say that again?
What did you think of MacArthur being fired? Truman and MacArthur?
Well, we would just hear rumor. We didn't know anything about it.
But did
We
you have
never knew
feelings?
anything.
Did you have feelings about it? Did you dislike Truman? Did you dislike MacArthur?
Had no idea. We didn't, over there, we didn't even know Truman was what he was doing.
Yeah. That was very controversial at that time.
Yes.
And it divided the country between those that took Truman's side and those that took MacArthur's side.
There was a lot of politics involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I say, we had no idea of any of that. Okay.
All right,
Thank you very
thank you,
much.
Dale.